Well, hello and welcome to another edition of the ClubLIFE Podcast. I'm Darren Flynn, the Chief Corporate Affairs Officer at Clubs New South Wales. Don't forget to catch up on previous episodes at clublife.com.au, Apple, Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Well, let's get straight into today's episode, and our special guest is Dale Hunt. As most of you would know, Dale is CEO of the Mounties Group, which encompasses 8 registered clubs across southwest Sydney, the Northern Beaches and the Central Coast. His personal story is a fascinating one, so let's get right into it. Dale Hunt, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me in, Darren.
Dale, a lot of club CEOs that we speak to have spent their entire careers within the industry. They may have started as a glassy and worked their way through the ranks, or a gaming attendant. That's not quite your story. Tell us a little bit about your early career.
Well, I think I was really fortunate that I took a bit of a journey before I found the club industry. I grew up down the south coast of New South Wales, as a lot of people will know. Came to Sydney and went into mental health nursing, dealt with disabilities, that kind of thing. From there into a corporate career in the health and medical industry, and then accidentally found a club out in Western Sydney and have been in clubs ever since.
I suppose people are central to everything you've done in all of those roles. Tell us about that experience in psychiatric nursing.
I think people at whatever stage of their life are made up through the parts of life experience they've had. So for me, as I said, I grew up in a small country town on the south coast, had never seen a building more than 2 stories tall until I came to Sydney. Got into nursing and had some really interesting experiences, but experiences I think that show you that everybody is just different. Everybody has their strengths, their weaknesses or whatever. And for me, I think that set a really strong base for moving forward through a career where you judge people individually, but it actually makes you more wholesome as a person. Well, it did for me.
I imagine there would have been some fairly confronting situations in that first role.
There were some very interesting occasions. There were some interesting experiences. But one great lady once told me that you can never judge people equally, that if you judge a monkey by its ability to climb a tree, you'll think everybody's stupid. So I think it's more important just to judge a person individually on their experiences and what they're going through.
So from psychiatric nursing into selling medical supplies where you enjoyed some success, then you found your way into the club industry. So tell us how you went from that very successful career into clubland.
At the end of my corporate career, I'd owned a part of the business, a third of the business, and we were lucky to be acquired. So I'd gone home and I'd worked decades without ever having a day off or an annual leave day. So I said to my wife, that's it, I'm taking 6 months off and doing absolutely nothing. I lasted 6 days before she told me to get the hell out of the house. I think I'd painted the house, I'd done the gardens, I'd repaired everything there was to repair. And I was so lucky to have Lynn as a wife that she said, look, just get out. I don't care what you do. Take up golf, do something. And I went down to the local RSL club at Richmond, applied for a job as a doorman, and just fell in love with the industry.
And we're going to talk a bit more about Richmond Club in a moment. We might take a step back, though, to your childhood on the South Coast, in and around Nowra, as I understand it. Yep. Tell us about that experience and how it shaped you as a person moving into adulthood.
I think there were some challenging times as a child. I don't think you realise it until you're an adult, the challenges you've been through. Yeah, we had some challenging times. I grew up in public housing, a single mother with some issues, and was so blessed to have an amazing sister that helped raise me. But I think those challenges set you up to be who you are today. So looking back, I think I've had the most blessed life of anyone.
And no doubt we'll talk a bit more later about Mounties' mission and how your experience in the past has fed into that. We might look at some of your hobbies, though, at the moment, because you do have a couple of interesting side hobbies. One is a love of martial arts, where I understand you've enjoyed a fair bit of success. Tell us a little bit about that.
Again, a journey that starts as a child. I think I was about 13 or 14 when I got into martial arts because I was being bullied and going through some life experiences. And again, that amazing sister put me into a martial arts school to toughen me up, I think, or to at least give me some self-confidence. And I was so fortunate to experience some friends that are still there today, some experiences that most people would never get to enjoy, to see parts of the world I never would have in my financial situation when I was a child, that I also gained an appreciation. I think martial arts or any sport, and clubs do so much with sport, it's so important. They build self-confidence, they give you that team spirit, they make you realise that it's not all about you. And yeah, I think it's just an amazing life experience for anybody.
And is it true that at one point in time you held some Australian titles?
I did okay, but now I'm much older and, geez, things have changed.
Now, I understand your other big love is that of restoring old cars. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, I have a few cars in the shed, so I have everything from an EH Holden to a LH Tirana to an MGA. I think we spend a lot of our days sitting behind a desk, thinking, planning, strategizing, and it is so good to go home, get your hands into a physical exercise, and that de-stressing where you're, at the end of the day, you can see what you've achieved, the difference you've made, and yeah, get your hands dirty.
I was going to ask you how you find the time, but clearly it's a priority for you to find that time so you can escape from the everyday. How many hours would you put into that each week?
Unfortunately, not enough. I was lucky enough to find the car restoration. I hadn't even gotten into it until my son was about 15. And back then, I think I was like every other parent in the country. I had a 15-year-old son that grunted, didn't know how to speak. And one day I brought home this EH Holden that he fell in love with, and I made him a deal that if he helped me work on it, he could have it when we finished. We spent every Saturday in the shed for the next 3.5 years. We went from him grunting and us not speaking and working all day on a car to at the end being best mates that we'd quite often go to the shed, not even touch the car and just talk all day. So I think from that love of cars has that emotional connection to the love of my son and the connection we made. So it's just been a natural transition that I keep trying to buy cars or motorcycles or whatever, hoping he'll come to the shed to help me.
Let's talk about you moving into clubs and your time at the Richmond Club, because it was the pivotal time in your life, working as a doorman, as security person at Richmond Club. That introduction to the club industry obviously started a bit of a love affair. Tell us about that time at Richmond.
I think I've been really fortunate my whole career. I've only ever worked for 4 CEOs. And during that time, every one of those has had such a major influence on where I've gotten to. When I started off as a doorman, I can remember my first promotion to being able to clean the glasses and ashtrays, and then working every job through the club industry other than in the kitchen. I think that leadership that I experienced, that I saw, taught me lessons that have led to who I am today as a leader of an organisation.
Do you think it's important for all CEOs to actually understand the work that their people do?
Without a doubt. But with that said now, so many years later, I know my staff, when I walk onto a floor and step behind a bar, actually send me out to pick up the glasses because I'm useless at pouring beers apparently or whatever. I think you still need that connection. We are a member-based organisation. We deal with people, and I know my clubs deal with 3.7 million people a year through the doors. Unless you're on the floor occasionally, unless you're with your staff, I think it's really easy to lose that connection, and I think that connection is the most important thing we have as a club.
We're going to move forward to your time at Harbo Diggers, because this was a pivotal time in your career, but also in the history of that club. There had been a long battle to try and redevelop the site. It was probably the most, it was the hidden gem of the New South Wales club industry for a long time, given its position there on the headland up at Freshwater and South Coco. But many had tried before and failed. Tell us about the experience of trying to get that development up and turning it into what it is today, which essentially is probably the one of the great examples of club diversification that we've seen.
I think many may have tried, but maybe they just weren't as stubborn as I was. We're in a really unique position. We had a block of land there, which was the last piece of headland that could be developed, at least in Greater Sydney, if not New South Wales. But at the same time, we had some community challenges there. We had our 3 local politicians there were at that time, one was the Prime Minister, one was the Premier in New South Wales, and the other was the Planning Minister of New South Wales. We had a community group that was very anti-development, so of course they didn't see it happening. And then we had this block of land on which sat a club that had had 60 years of being hit with salt water and wind and everything else. They'd gone not long before I arrived at Mounties, they'd gone to council with a proposal to build 16 townhouses, and they were knocked back because it was overdevelopment. We were fortunate enough to go through such a community engagement program, such a buy-in from members that 16 townhouses may have been knocked back, but we ended up with 3 restaurants, a cafe, 2 bars, beauty salons, childcare centres, 96 retirement apartments, and a number of other things. But it was certainly 7.5 years of battle every step of the way.
I know you're not one to take plaudits yourself, but how proud are you of that achievement and what sits there now at Freshwater?
Absolutely could not be more proud. Probably one of the highlights of my career. Fortunate enough to have been surrounded by people that wanted it as much as I did and that worked so hard to get it delivered. Whether it was the CEO at the time, Greg Pickering, or whether it was a HR assistant or an operations manager, that team came together unlike any I've seen before. And they certainly faced some challenges.
Now, you moved on remarkably just before the venue opened to take up a position at the Blacktown Workers Club. I think you're there for about 8 or 9 months. Why did you decide to make that move?
That was probably one of the hardest discussions I'd ever had, to go and say to Greg Pickering that it was time to leave 8 weeks before Harbo Diggers opened. But you'd spent those years building this amazing project. You know, at one stage there, I was managing double semi-trailer loads arriving every 2.5 minutes. We were excavating 8,000 tonne of sandstone a day, managing the finances and even paying road tolls of $10,000 a day. And in 8 weeks' time, it was all going to stop. And I was going to go back to being a venue manager. And I know Greg had other plans and all the rest of it, but that's the way I saw it. Then I looked around and there was a Blacktown Workers. Again, I'm so lucky to have worked at Blacktown Workers. It's a club with so much potential and such amazing human beings working there that staff are some of the greatest people I've ever met. So I think it was just meant to be. And unfortunately, yes, I only lasted 11 months, but you only get an opportunity to become CEO of Mounties once, I think.
Well, that's right. Biggest club group in Australia. In fact, we might just run through some of the details that came out of the annual report, which is just hot off the presses. But Dale, it makes for pretty impressive reading. An economic contribution to New South Wales of $277 million. You've created 4,000 local jobs. That's both direct and indirect employment opportunities created by Mounties operations. Your membership's now at 256,000 people. You paid $55 million tax in the last year. Made a community contribution of $26.8 million. Now, looking at the AFR's measure, it makes you the 380th largest non-listed company in Australia, and perhaps more importantly, the 18th most giving company in the nation. Now, as the CEO of the Mounties Group, that must make you enormously proud.
I think it's that last number that makes me more proud than anything. I've been back at Mounties now 5 years, and it's been one heck of a journey. 5 years ago, we were in a very different situation. To be able to grow that organisation because of the people around me, and that's one of the huge benefits a large club has over a smaller club, is the people that you can attract. To be able to do that in 5 years, to be able to give $26 million to a community and know that that will be sustainable if the current business model stays the same, that's something that I'm very proud of. But I also realise that I'm only one club. You put on an entire club industry, and if one club can deliver those figures, an entire club industry actually changes thousands and thousands of lives.
When you reflect upon Mounties' growth over the last several decades, I mean, this is a club that started life in a tin shed.
Yeah.
Does it upset you at all that the idea of a new club emerging throughout New South Wales is now becoming something of a pipe dream? We're seeing clubs close. We're not seeing a lot of new clubs open. Is that something that's a bit of a loss for New South Wales, that we don't have the potential to grow large numbers of new clubs?
I think it's sad, not just for the club industry. I think it's sad for New South Wales. Mounties was started by 10 young families that just wanted to help their neighbours and the people around them. Clubs across New South Wales have all started for different reasons. 20-something% have started to support rugby league. I think it's about 22% that are there for the RSL traditions. Then there's bowling clubs and cultural clubs and religious clubs. We are so fortunate that we sit in that little 4% of the club industry that exists and was created to improve our community. I think the saddest part that we have as a state now is that the next generation won't actually have necessarily those profit-for-purpose organisations that were created to deliver something that's so important, that have made positive contributions. And if we talk about Mounties, 10,000 children sponsored to play sport, that'll change their lives. I think the one thing clubs are most underestimated for is that social inclusion, where only nowadays we're hearing how important the reducing of loneliness is, how important meeting places are to new immigrant personalities and profiles. The way we are going at the moment, I think New South Wales is going to miss out because it's such an advantage we've had over other states and other countries. If you go to any regional town, I think it's the best illustration. You have a town hall, a local cinema, and a club. And they're the cornerstones of creating a community that gathers together and supports each other.
All right, we talked a bit about Mounties and the Mounties venues, obviously 8 venues across New South Wales, but a big part of the Mounties Group now is your focus on Mounties Care, and you move into medical services provision, your support of the Care Flight helicopter. This is something that's you're obviously very passionate about individually, and there's some personal reasons why you've gotten into some of these areas. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Look, I keep hearing people say that we have diversified and we've changed and we're moving our club in a different direction. Well, I actually completely disagree with that. I think Mounties in the last 5 years has started to get back to exactly why it was created in the first place. And that was to improve lives of local people in our community. The community around us has changed over the last 60 years that Mounties has existed. Where they used to look for that place to get together and have a beer, which is still so important, that social inclusion, the needs of our community have changed into healthcare, into delivering services that are not as easy to access as it used to be, that are more confusing. And if we can take that confusion out, if we can make that healthcare more affordable, if we can just make it easier for people to live a better life, we're back to why we were created in the first place. But I think, again, you go back to those life experiences. And for me, when Careflight knocked on our door for a sponsorship, for example, my son, again, when he was 3-year-old, had a case of epiglottitis, and we needed that emergency retrieval team to save his life. My father-in-law went through dementia and has only just in the last few weeks passed away, but we didn't know where to go for help when that was happening. And if a person like me, who is in such a fortunate position, doesn't know what to do, how to help, how to make life easier, then I think we get that responsibility to make sure that others can. So yeah, Mounties Care is an evolution of our club. It's back to our core purpose, but it's back to that reason of simply improving lives, and we will deliver it. We're determined.
Now, obviously, a lot of the investment from the Mounties Group for things like Mounties Care comes from some of the profits generated by the gaming side of the business. How big of an obligation or responsibility do you feel as the CEO of the biggest club group and the biggest individual club in New South Wales to make sure that that gaming revenue is put to a good purpose for the community?
We're an organisation that doesn't have the most poker machines, but we certainly have the highest revenue of gaming in New South Wales. And I think if you're going to enter into any area such as gambling, such as alcohol, along with that comes a social responsibility. And we have to ensure that we're delivering it in the safest possible way for our community. If I was going to be really blunt and completely open and transparent on this, if my mother was going to go out and enjoy some entertainment which included gambling, I'd want her in one of my clubs. Because in a club like ours, I know that there's somebody there that cares for them. I know there's restrictions like a maximum $10 bet. I know that there are help services available if somebody needs that. Where I don't see that in all other places that offering gambling. I am seriously concerned about online gambling. A person sits at home in a bedroom all alone with a digital device using a credit card compared to coming to an open venue surrounded by people using the cash only, that they can't use credit, so they can't spend on credit. I think we have such a social responsibility and such a personal moral responsibility to make sure that if people are going to gamble, it is in the safest possible way. But I also think of it in a way that if we had thousands of cars driving down a busy highway every day and 2% of those cars had an accident, we would fix the road. We wouldn't ban driving. And I think we're at a stage where it's time to fix the road. We need to do what we need to do to help those that do have problems, but to make sure that everybody else has that freedom of choice that we should have as Australians.
Do you have more confidence now in the gaming reform roadmap at a New South Wales government level, given the position of the Minns government and the process that's been adopted with the independent panel? Do you feel like we're in a good position?
I've actually evolved myself, or come to actually appreciate more that, from my perspective, from what I can see, is that decisions are now being made on fact, on research, on information, not on grasping something out of the air. I was hesitant with a change of government and worried about what would happen. And I must admit, I admire the way they're approaching it. And I may not agree with every outcome they bring up, but I can see that it's being done in a conscious way to make things better.
Big focus on vibrancy for this government, and one of the first
start me on that.
indicators of
How
that.
do we have a nighttime vibrancy launch in a library that closes at 8 p.m? Sorry.
It's a fair point. The 5 kilometre rule was probably the first genuine step from the government to implement some of those vibrancy reforms. What was your view on the removal of the 5 kilometre rule, or the imminent removal of the 5 kilometre rule?
Look, it took us a step closer, I think, to an even playing field. there's certain advantages that clubs have over other businesses, and there's certain advantages other businesses have over clubs. It's certainly brought a more level playing field. I haven't really decided yet what we will do as an organisation, because I think, unfortunately, a lot of clubs don't use the information or the data that we're given, as well as many other organisations in different, periods of their business. So any restriction that allows a person to come to our venues and experience our venue, if we can remove any restriction from a person getting to know what a club is, then it's a great thing.
Let's talk about amalgamations, because Mounties has been quite active on the amalgamations front over the last decade or so. 8 clubs in the group at the moment. What are you looking for in an amalgamation partner? 8
clubs in the group at the moment, 32 other organisations or businesses that we've acquired in recent years. And I think we look for the same in an amalgamation partner as in any business we acquire. I guess you look at it as a marriage. It's not about the business or the structure or the building. It's about the people. And it's about being able to bring a relationship together that'll work long term. And for us, I think that's probably the closest analogy, that if we're going to have a marriage partner or a child or whichever way we look at it, it's about the people and making sure that those people fit our values, but at the same time allowing them to be their own person and their own personality and have their own activities.
We're currently capped at 10 clubs per club group. There is some discussion about whether or not that should be raised. What's your view?
I think it should absolutely be raised. My concern isn't about a Mounties getting bigger or a large club growing. My concern is we're about to go through some really tough times in the club industry. But if there is a limitation that stops a larger club joining with a smaller club to save that smaller club, will it mean that we will lose some of our smaller clubs and some of our communities that really need their club may lose their smaller clubs? Or does it also prevent a larger club that's fortunate enough to have the economies of scale, the skill sets of certain managers and the rest of it, not sharing that with those smaller clubs? I just think that we need to be open up to, again, a level playing field. If a hotel group can have 90 pubs, why is it that a club can only have 10? As long as we don't allow that club to lose its identity or its individual purpose or its delivery to its local community. I know that our Central Coast clubs delivered over $6 million in support this year to the local community. Some of those clubs that we've amalgamated with, or other clubs have amalgamated with, would never get to make that difference if they didn't have the opportunity of an amalgamation.
It is an important discussion, because we are seeing a large number of clubs putting out expressions of interest in amalgamation as the child club, which often indicates that they may have trouble continuing on their own 2 feet.
And the cap means that the larger clubs that are reading those expressions of interest are wondering, if I can only amalgamate with 10, is this the right one for us?
And it makes it harder. They've got to make a harder decision on whether or not they can amalgamate with a particular club. How concerned are you about the viability of the club industry moving forward, particularly at the smaller club level and regionally?
I think my concern is going to be that medium club level. Smaller clubs can often survive, deliver to a limited number of people, a limited service, and survive. Larger clubs have the economies of scale, as I said. They have the purchasing power, they have the skill set to grow and evolve and change or whatever. But those medium-sized clubs, they're the guys that are facing the increased legislation, regulatory environments, everything else that's happening, cost of living impacts, without the resources or the balance sheets or the profitability to be able to deliver into the future.
You might not like to admit this, but you're a mentor to a number of club general managers and club managers around New South Wales.
All that shows is those general managers have bad taste.
Well, a lot of those clubs are in regional parts of the state, and these relationships grew off the back of natural disasters. How important are those relationships? Clearly, you're providing advice and support to clubs. Why are those relationships important for you?
I think these guys like myself that are getting near the end of their career, and we've been so blessed to work in this industry and got so much out of this industry. I think during that time we were fortunate enough to find people that were able to share their knowledge, their skills or whatever. If I can spend an hour with a person, have a coffee or just a phone call and take a little bit of stress off those guys or give some advice that helps them, I can guarantee the conversation is always 2 ways and I get just as much as I give out of any of those conversations. I've learnt more from smaller club industry guys than I've learnt from bigger club guys. But if we're going to have an industry that's sustainable, if we're going to have an industry that grows, if we're going to have an industry that helps so many people, I think we all have to be together, sharing that same experiences that we've all had.
And there are other big club CEOs who have similar relationships.
Yeah.
But do you think we need to make more of this as an industry, that we're here to help each other?
Yeah, without a doubt. We are one industry. There is a lot of competition out there. And it's not the traditional guys, it's not each other either. But I think if we can band together, if we can work together, it's not us that benefits all the time, it's the people that we serve.
You're obviously CEO of the biggest club group in the state, or the biggest club in New South Wales. How do you think you'd go running a small club?
Oh, I'd be terrible. I admire those guys so much. Those small club guys that can be dealing with a supplier one moment, pouring a beer another, then doing the accounts. They do it all. I am so lucky that my biggest advantage is that I can surround myself with amazing human beings. I've taken a marketing manager from Disneyland. I brought a CFO in from overseas to manage my business. I surround myself with the most amazing management team with such phenomenal skills that these small guys don't get that opportunity or that advantage. They just work bloody hard. They're the guys that are really the backbone that you just admire so darn much.
This might put you in a slightly awkward position because you've dealt with so many good operators over the years, but if you had to single out 2 or 3 people that you've interacted with in the industry over the last 25 years who you really hold in very high regard, who may have at certain times given you really solid advice, could you pick out a couple for us?
Oh, wow. This will start the biggest argument in the industry, won't it? I think clubs go through the same as every other business in the world. And we go through a business life cycle. And we start off as a startup, we go into a growth period, there's a maturity period, there's a post-maturity period, and there's a decline period. And I think that across that lifespan, different managers have different skills, bring different things to it. And if I look across our industry, I look at guys like a Scott Bennett at Revesby, and that analytical brain, that approach is just so darn good. I then look at a small club manager, a Peter Sargent out of Bathurst, for example, one of the most intelligent managers this industry has, or a Terry Sheehan up at Ballina there at Cherry Street Sports, who's so community focused, or a Greg Pickering, who is just at the top of his game at a post-mature organisation. And you couldn't pick out one, but geez, at each stage, and I think the secret of any club success is to have the right CEO at the right stage of that life cycle, but there are so many darn good managers out there. We've just got to make sure they're at the right stage. And let's be honest, there's some shockers too.
You mentioned Greg Pickering there, Dale, obviously someone you've worked very closely with over the years. What did you learn from Greg, and what do you find most impressive about the way Greg goes about his business?
Look, let's hope Greg Pickering never listens to this podcast, because I would say that Greg Pickering is the best of the best. If you see Greg Pickering, you've got to say, I didn't say it, and all I said was that he got old and he had to go to reserve grade because he couldn't keep up the pace anymore. But if I look at a Greg Pickering, I learnt so much from Greg, but I guess the skill I learnt most from Greg is he has this unique ability to bring a person to the absolute best that they can be without that person feeling like he's guiding them or pushing them in any way. Greg is smart, he is engaged, but he is a phenomenal business person at the same time. Greg's an introvert, so he can come across as a bit standoffish, where when you get to know him, he's probably one of the nicest human beings you'll meet. Just don't tell him.
That's a good wrap. That's as good as we're going to get there on that. Let's talk about some of the work that Mounties is doing in the domestic violence space at the moment with Aurelie Carrion, who's sort of leading the charge by offering training to other clubs around New South Wales. Tell us a bit about Aurelie's work and why it's such a big priority for you as the CEO of Mounties Group.
I think the domestic violence program that Mounties is offering at the moment is probably a great showcase of what clubs are doing in so many fields. It's an example, but not the only thing, if that makes sense. Aurelie coming to me a few years ago actually put me on my heels that I'd never experienced domestic violence. I'd never seen it from any side. I didn't really understand it. And if somebody had come to me and said, I'm a victim of domestic violence, I probably would have made as dumb a comment as, well, why don't you leave them? Aurelie's personal experience, when she sat down and spoke to me about it, actually changed my whole mindset. That if 1 in 6 people, 1 in 6 women are going through this domestic violence. That means 1 in 6 of my staff are going through it, 1 in 6 of my members, 1 in 6 of my friends are going through this, and I had no idea. And if I look at the response from the club industry, it has been so amazing that any person in our community would want to help that, would want to support and make lives better for their friends, their family, their staff. So I think Aureli's drive at this domestic violence program has given a club industry an ability to come together and address something that's so important in our community. Look, it was more than 10 years ago that the government announced that this was a national crisis. And here we are a decade later, and a national crisis hasn't been fixed. So whatever we were doing wasn't working. We also know that we work in some of the more socially pressured areas, and we have that social licence and that social responsibility to make sure that the impacts that we're having are as positive as they should be. And I think this is just one area in which an industry can change a nation.
My next question was actually, what are you most proud of in your time in the club industry? Clearly, this domestic violence program would be one of them, but what are some of the things that you're most proud of?
Wow, it's a really difficult question because I've been so lucky. I've done so many things, and it's not the biggest development in club history. It's not leading the number one club in the country. It's not taking a club from 27 to 13 or growing Mounties to what it is today. I think it would simply be a fact that we had one of our founding members from Mounties come up to me 6 months ago. And we'd been through a number of issues with the organisation, with the community and all the rest of it. And this I think she's 96-year-old lady came up to me and said to me, hang in there, we are proud of you and you've brought us together as one group. And to bring 200,000, 250,000 people together as one group because they can see that you genuinely give a damn, I think that's something to be really proud of. Whether it's 20,000, 10,000 or 250,000, our role in clubs, if we can bring a community together, whether it's for domestic violence or whether it's to support something else in our community, I don't think we'll ever have a more important role.
What do you see as the biggest challenge or the biggest challenges for the club industry in the next, say, 10 to 20 years?
We're going to go through some really rapid regulatory changes. We're going to go through a major income source that was decreasing before anyone brought up anti-poker machine information. We're in a post-mature industry. I think the biggest challenge we have at the moment is relevance. I think the biggest problem we have at the moment is people don't understand clubs like they used to. They don't understand why we exist. They don't understand what we do. And if we could do anything, if we could get people to truly see inside a club and why it exists, that would be the biggest challenge we would have, but it would also be the biggest win we could ever do as human beings.
Natural follow-on from that question, why will registered clubs still be here in 100 years' time?
Because we have a purpose. We exist for a reason, and I think we lost that for a number of years. We exist for a real reason. I operate in some of the highest migrant areas in Australia. So a community gathering place where those people can come together as one, no matter where you've come from, no matter what sex you are, no matter what age you are, no matter what background or life experience you've had, for us to be delivering something that brings a community together at the same time as evolving into delivering more to members' needs in the highest pressured time of history in Australia with cost of living increases and so on and so much, that I think if we can remember why we were created, why we exist, people will recognise the relevance of us, and I don't think Australia can afford to lose the club industry.
If you were going to give advice to young Dale when young Dale was taking up his first CEO's gig, what advice would that be?
I think a piece of advice I was given when I came in at CEO of Mounties, same old cranky bugger gave it to me when I said to him, geez, they're big shoes to fill. And he said to me, well, I didn't know you wore my shoes. Wear your bloody own. I think if I was going to give advice to a young manager coming through, would be yourself. Don't lose your personal values. You came into a club industry for a reason. You've decided to make this your career for a reason. Don't forget those reasons and just stay true to yourself and to your members.
Is the Mounties CEO gig your dream job?
I don't know. You've just suggested that I go and work in a small club. Yeah, no. Mounties, I am so blessed to be working at Mounties. It is the greatest organisation that I've ever experienced. Surrounded by amazing human beings and getting to make a real difference, and I can measure that difference and see that impact I'm making. This is as good as it gets, at least, at this stage.
Do you think it'll be your last club job?
It's planned to be my last job, yeah, absolutely. I think I'm 60 this year. We're heading towards retirement, not for a few years yet, but I think it'll be the last job unless I do take that advice and go and work at, Sussex Inlet RSL or something as a doorman on my way out.
I'm sure you do very well, Dale Hunt. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. Thanks for your time.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, Dale Hunt there, CEO of the Mounties Group. That's all we have time for in today's edition of the Club Life Podcast. Thanks for listening. Don't forget, you can find new episodes along with our back catalogue at clublife.com.au on Apple, Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you search Club Life Podcast and also hit subscribe so you never miss a thing. If you have a suggestion on who might make an interesting guest, by all means get in touch with the team by emailing clublife@clubsnsw.com.au. Thanks for listening, and until next time, goodbye.